the second chapter of Acts. Let me go ahead and read that. When the day of Shavuot had come, they were all together in one place. Suddenly there came from heaven a sound like a mighty rushing wind, and it filled the whole house where they were sitting. And tongues like fire spreading out appeared to them and settled on each of them. They were all filled with the Ruach HaKodesh and began to speak in other tongues as the Ruach enabled them to speak out. All right, now I wanted to just let everybody know that okay, I had kind of advertised this class as one that we're going to look at Acts from a Jewish point of view. So what I'm trying to do is to give everyone a little bit of Jewish background on these things. So let's talk about Shavuot. Now, the festival of Shavuot is one of three regalim. Now, what is the regalim? The regalim is it's one of three feasts that occurred in, there's 7 feasts in the mandatory feasts in the Bible, and so we've got the 3 of them that are called the regalim. These are the required feasts. These are the ones where every male is supposed to go back to Jerusalem for Pesach and Sukkot, and then of course this feast of Shavuot. Now this occurs 50 days after Passover, and then right after Passover we start counting the Omer, as it's called. We count the Omer down, and so when you get to 50 days after Passover, that is Shavuot. And the name Shavuot comes from Exodus 34 and 22. It's called the Feast of Weeks because basically it's 7 times 7 days, and then the one is the 50, but it's the Feast of Weeks, and it comes from 7 weeks after Passover or Pesach. Now, on Shavuot, the first fruits of the wheat harvest were presented to Adonai in the temple. It consisted of 2 loaves of bread made with leavened flour. This celebrated God's providence at the beginning of the wheat harvest. Now, today, when we have Shavuot, we still take these 2 big loaves of challah, and we hold them up, and each one of them is supposed to be about I don't know, 2.5, 3 pounds or something like that. These huge loaves that they're very big. It's quite challenging for my wife to make these loaves because they're so huge. You almost have to put them catty-cornered in the oven to make these things come up, and then she does a beautiful job, and then you hold them up like that and wave them before the Lord. It's kind of a nice thing to do, and we enjoyed doing that on Shavuot. Now, in addition to the obvious agricultural significance of Shavuot, it later became understood as commemorating the giving of Torah to Moses at Sinai. Now, so we can see that the 3 regalim that I mentioned are all associated with a specific important event in the history of Israel. The first one being Passover. That celebrates the coming out of Egypt, and where basically the Lord is taking this gaggle of people who were 12 tribes, and he's putting them together, in effect creating a nation. So Passover is kind of associated with creation, and then we come to the Shavuot, where God had given them the Torah. So he revealed himself and revealed his laws, his instructions to the children of Israel. And so Shavuot then becomes a celebration or commemorative of revelation or revealing. And then we go to the next of the regalim, which is Sukkot. And in Sukkot, that is where it talks about where they were in the wilderness for 40 days. We hang out in these little booths that you can see up through, and it brings to mind our people wandering around in the wilderness for 40 years, and then finally they get to go into the promised land. So they are finally redeemed. And so what that means is that the festival of Sukkot then is redemption. So you've got creation, revelation, and finally redemption in those three things there. In fact, I think, yeah, I've got it on this slide here. I got a little bit ahead of myself on that, but you can see that Passover, creation of the Jewish nation, Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, and it's also called Pentecost because it is 50 days after Passover, and that is kind of a revelatory. And then Sukkot, the Feast of Booths or the Feast of Tabernacles, what has both of those names, and it is symptomatic or symbolic of redemption. Now, going back to because Shavuot is about the revelation of God to His people, we in Shavuot we'll read passages from Exodus 19 and 20. And if you really wanted to be traditional about it, we had all day in the synagogue. We would read the entire Exodus 19 and 20. And then other readings would include Ezekiel 1 and 2 and Habakkuk 3, because Ezekiel 1 and 2 and Habakkuk, those are books about, or the readings about the appearance of God. It's a theophany. And so it's where Ezekiel saw God, and then in a vision, and then the Habakkuk 3 is where he revealed himself to Habakkuk. Okay, then the book of Ruth is also read at Shavuot because, it's about harvest. You remember that she's out in the field, and she sees Boaz, and he's the next of kin, and well, he was a kinsman. He wasn't the exact next of kin, but he was a kinsman, and so basically they end up. As you know, the story is during harvest, and he tells his men, he says, "Hey, leave a little bit of stuff there for Ruth to pick up, and so that she can fill her basket with wheat very quickly, and she doesn't have to work so hard." And so the end of the story is that they get married, and Ruth says, "Your people will be my people." And we're still doing that today. I know this guy that got married about 45 years ago, and his wife had it sung at their wedding, said, "Your people will be my people." And so that was very, very fitting. And so we've been married for 45 years after that. So anyway, it's still going on, still going on. The idea of Ruth. The story of Ruth, it's kind of a hint, or what we would call a remez. You remember from my membership class yesterday, we talked about Peshat and remez and midrash. So this is kind of a hint of what is going to be coming, that God would take Ruth, who was a Moabite, and she would come into to the people of Israel, and she would become part of the children of Israel. And in fact, King David then is bloodline then, and then of course Yeshua, the Messiah of all the world, was part of her bloodline. So that becomes very important. So this is kind of a future aspect of God's work on earth, and He's joining the Gentiles to God's people through Messiah Yeshua. And finally, Shavuot is the traditional date of the death of King David. And so this we'll actually look at that when we get into Peter's sermon next week. That gets mentioned again, and it gains a little importance at that. Why did we spend so much time talking about Shavuot? Okay, it's because as God is bringing in the new covenant, remember in the Jeremiah 31, 30 to 33 says, and I'm going to give you a new covenant where the law is no longer written on a tablet of stone. It is going to be written on your hearts. And so he's bringing that in. So God made maximum use of history and culture of Shavuot to do so. He was connecting new concepts of the Torah written on our hearts with the Holy Spirit coming in our lives, putting all of that together and connecting it to the old truths which his people would understand, which was the Torah and the traditions and so forth. So that's why I spent a good bit of time on just the idea in verse 1 here of chapter 2. It says, and it was on Shavuot. Most people are going to blow right past that and not even think about, okay, yeah, that's nice. It was on Shavuot. What's Shavuot? So anyway, we went through all of that so that you understand that it's all connected. There is a connection to the traditions and to what